Type 1, Type 2 hypervisors, virtual switching, virtual machines. Well, we want to find out more right here on IT Pro TV.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
We are jumping right into taking a look at, well, device virtualization. And here, of course, to help guide us through this topic, Anthony Segura. Anthony, as we get started here, there are some weird terms that maybe somebody that is coming over from CCNA, maybe they've only dealt with routers and switches. Now we start throwing in terms like hypervisor, virtual switches.
Yeah, strange, isn't it?
Yeah, so where should we begin if we're first beginning and trying to understand this?
I think a lot of our students would not be surprised when they see all this cloud technology in their Cisco training these days. But one thing that might be a surprise is there's so much virtualization training. Well, remember, we would not have cloud today if it were not for virtualization. I'm going to repeat that. Hugely important that we embrace that fact. Without all this virtualization, we wouldn't have cloud. So in episodes here, we previously have discussed things like, do we deploy to the cloud or do we deploy on-prem? And what does that look like? Well, now we are talking virtualization, which is it's like a mainstay today. And I brought something up on screen for us here. We start with this whole Type 1 versus Type 2 hypervisor thing. This is, when we say hypervisor, it's a big fancy word for specialized software that gives us virtualization capabilities. Let me repeat that. A hypervisor is just a fancy word for software that allows you to virtualize. And a Type 1 versus Type 2 hypervisor just refers to like the implementation technique. What I have on screen right here, Ronnie, as you can see, is and let me zoom in, you'll note that this is VMware's Fusion product. So I am on a Mac and I have VMware Fusion, and notice there are virtual machines that I have created here, and there's a Windows 10 machine, and I've got that in a virtual machine because I like to experiment with it. I don't want to experiment with my own Surface Book running Windows 10. I experiment with this Windows 10 copy as a virtual machine, so I don't mess anything up on my personal laptop. Then I've got Viral in here. We'll talk about that in a minute. But so I've got these virtual machines in this hypervisor, and the hypervisor is this VMware Fusion product. And this needs the Mac OS to run, and that's what makes it a Type 2 hypervisor. It requires an operating system so that it can install inside of that. So you already figured out what a Type 1 hypervisor is, haven't you? It's one that doesn't require an OS. The hypervisor is the OS itself, if you want to look at it that way.
So let's make sure we give some examples. You just showed us one, and this is a Type 2 hypervisor, and that's because it requires, if you're running Windows and you actually download this, it works as an application inside of Windows, and so you might see something like that, but in Windows it would be called VMware Workstation, if I remember correctly.
That's right. Another Type 2 hypervisor.
Yeah, and VirtualBox.
VirtualBox is a Type 2 hypervisor. You need an operating system to install it in.
So most of us, maybe if we haven't really worked in the enterprise and we're still going towards our CCNP, you said Type 1. What do you mean it acts as an operating system? Maybe that might be more confusing. Can you give us an example of what type of terminology they may hear here?
Yeah. So the famous Type 1 hypervisor, it's more famous than any other one, is VMware's ESXi. ESXi is free from VMware. You download it, you go over to a machine that has no operating system on it, and you install ESXi. That is so hard for me to say. Yeah. ESXi, and that's it. You're ready to go. You connect to that machine using a web browser, and you can spin up virtual machines. So I have on screen right here, zoomed in to my VMware Fusion running. I have Viral. Let me highlight it. The reason why I have Viral highlighted is it is super unique. Cisco's Virtual Internet Routing Lab, or whatever it's called, Cisco's Viral can be installed in one of three ways. You can install it on bare metal. So there's an image they sell you, and you just go right up to that machine and install it. It can be installed as a Type 1 product. You install it in ESXi, or it can be installed inside a Type 2 hypervisor. So a lot of vendors now are creating products that give you a lot of flexibility in how you deploy their solution, and Viral is a prime example of that. When Ronnie and I decided to deploy Viral to use for demonstrations and practice in this class, we deployed it inside of ESXi, so we deployed it in a Type 1 manner. Now, Type 1 hypervisors are often called bare metal hypervisors, and that is because, think about it, we take the Type 1 software, ESXi is an example, and we install it onto the machine with nothing there in our way. So that's why they are called bare metal hypervisors.
Yeah, so another example that would be something like Microsoft Hyper-V or Citrix Zen Server. So all of those are actually
I am
Type 1 type.
so glad you brought that up. The most interesting point of discussion on this topic, in my opinion, is Microsoft's Hyper-V. You would think that that is a Type 2. Microsoft's Hyper-V requires Windows 10 or Windows Server. So you immediately go, well, it's got to be a Type 2. It requires that operating system. You know, it's actually a Type 1. Yeah. In an exam, you would choose Type 1. Not that Cisco would ever ask you such a thing. They wouldn't, but Microsoft might. It is a Type 1. Even though we have to have Windows to have that feature, it is communicating directly with the hardware and is not using the operating system. So technically, it's a Type 1.
Yeah, so it's amazing that there are tons of different virtualization technologies that we may encounter. I remember the very first hypervisor I ran was one called Microsoft's Virtual PC, was the very first one that I ran, and then I quickly figured out using something like VirtualBox. All these were actually within my realm of understanding because I had an operating system and installed like an application, fairly easy to run. Now, in your experience as you first go back, Anthony, and think about Type 1 hypervisor, all of a sudden I got a little bit lost at the beginning. What do you think?
Oh, completely. I mean, we all tend to cut our teeth on VMs and virtualization with Type 2s. Definitely. Like you said, VirtualBox is a lot of people's first. My first was indeed VMware's Workstation. So, you know, we all tend to start with the Type 2 world, but I encourage you, if you've never done it, take an old machine that's laying around and format that machine. Just get all the software off that machine and then load ESXi. Typically, you do it onto a thumb drive and then boot from that and install ESXi and play with it. It really is something that you want to try. Now, pulled up on screen, Ronnie, I've got AWS. And in the AWS environment, we can have our virtual machines. And one thing that I wanted to stress here is that they're going to not only give you the ability to spin up the virtual machine, but they've virtualized everything for you. Look at this. If we look in their virtual machine area, notice, Ronnie, that we've got virtual network interfaces that we can create to connect to our gadgets. We've got security groups. This is nothing more than a firewall. We've got in here the volumes of the hard disks that we're going to install on top of. So everything, including the routing and the switching that's going on, it's all in here and it's all virtualized. So one of the terms on the Encore blueprint is virtual switching. And that could mean a whole lot of things. It could mean it's a virtual switch, total virtual switch inside your cloud. Cisco had created one of those called the Nexus 1000V virtual switch. I do believe that's end of sale, end of life now, but they created a virtual switch to plug right into VMware. For those of us that love the Cisco CLI and are familiar with Cisco products, we'd feel right at home with that virtual switch. But be careful, virtual switching might also be referring to like VLANs, right? Because that's taking a switch and virtualizing it when we create different VLANs on it. It might refer to taking a Catalyst 6500 series device and virtualizing it into different administrative partitions. So virtual switching is kind of a careful, like we better approach that with care when we are talking to someone and make sure we know exactly what they're talking about. Now, as far as the Encore blueprint goes, our biggest concern, what they're speaking of there with virtual switching is a completely virtualized cloud-based switch like the 1000V or like what Amazon Web Services would give us dynamically inside of the cloud.
Now, before we completely move on from this topic, let's go back to virtual machines just for a moment, because one of the things that I didn't realize at the beginning is the idea of resources with virtual machines. So when we start to talk about something like this, even though there are nuances, let's make sure we understand the basics. So for example, Anthony, if I wanted to install, let's say, a Windows 10 machine, a virtual machine, I can't just make it build up and say, I'm just going to give it 256 megs of RAM to make that actually work, or a 10 gig hard drive. I have to make sure that I meet at least the minimum requirements, right?
Yeah, to a point. Let's jump back into my VMware Fusion so I can show you that, Ronnie. So here I do have a real Windows 10 system, and if I right-click and go to Settings, we'll have the ability to fully control this thing from the settings perspective, because notice it's not running, right? So it's shut down. So now I can go in and I can manipulate all of these settings. And notice, Ronnie, if we go into processors and memory, notice I've given this 4 gig. Now I have a little rule. Friends don't let friends run Windows on 4 gig, okay? That's my rule. But notice, what have I done here? I've given myself only 4 gig, and I've got this 32 gig MacBook Pro. So there was plenty of room for me to give this VM, more memory. Guess what? There's a really cool thing about virtual machines, and that is they run more efficiently than real machines. That's one of the reasons we love virtualization. Now, I'm speaking in general terms here, by the way. Generally, they run more efficiently with smaller amounts of resources. So watch this, Ronnie. This thing only was given 4 gig, but I'm going to go ahead and do something I didn't plan to do. So there's a really good chance this is going to blow up. But I'm going to go ahead and right-click this and, like the Mick Jagger says, start it up. And we are now booting that Windows 10 box, and watch this. We'll look at boot times here, just kind of as a gauge as to how efficient this VM is. And we are almost up. And there we are. That is not that bad. And my machine right now is actually taxed because I'm running a whole bunch of other things in the background. But you can see that this is look at that login time, right? So this is a pretty, and something had to be installed there, so it just totally kicked me out. But I think you get the idea, right? This is a pretty high performance virtual machine, and it's doing something I would never do with an actual real physical machine, and that is only give it 4 gigs of RAM. Let me launch an application here, the Atom editor, when I'm learning to code, and look at that. I mean, this performs really, really well, Ronnie, only on 4 gigs, so keep that in mind. But yeah, you were totally right. Just because it's virtual doesn't mean that we don't have to give it resources. It still needs disk, CPU, RAM. If it's going to play music, old school, it needs a CD-ROM. It needs all that stuff.
So this is very interesting technology that we want to make sure that we are familiar with. If you already are familiar with this, maybe a review topic for you, but make sure you understand, especially for just easy points on the exam as well. So make sure you do take a look at type 1, type 2 hypervisors, as well as virtual machines, and the idea and concepts of virtual switching, all these which we've covered in this episode. So signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm your host, Ronnie Wong.
And I'm virtual Anthony Sequeira.
Stay tuned right here for more of your CCNP Encore show.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.